Mark wasn't sure what to think of the moon up close, which was an absolutely bizarre thought to have, but on brand as far as he was concerned. Even if he had been blown away, in some rapturous awe inside, he would have kept his calm, cocky swagger on the outside because that's what everyone expected of him. The moon, though, just seemed to hang there. Acres upon acres of barren land, gray, monotonous, boring. Earth had awed him, but it was because he could, with a single glance, view the entirety of humanity. When he had first been in orbit years ago, he had been on autopilot as he spoke to mission control, the whole of his heart and soul fixated on those little bundles of light dotting the globe. Births, deaths, love, sex. Everything that encompassed life itself unfolding, invisible, beneath him. He wished he had gotten a better look after liftoff this time around. But time was of the essence. It was a tragedy that the first-timers on the ship hadn't been able to have that life-affirming glimpse of Earth. But he swore he would make it so they could look their fill on the return flight as they rocketed home in triumph. He gave himself a few minutes to fantasize about the hero worship this crew would receive on their return, but it was almost immediately soured as he pictured the families embracing the other astronauts, mothers and fathers and children, while Kirby was tasked with shaking politicians' hands because there wasn't ever anyone to welcome him home. When we get home, I'm gonna find myself a good girl and settle down. No more empty houses, no more clammy handshakes after a job well done. I want a wife to leave lipstick prints on my cheek, and I want a son to brag to his classroom about his dad, the hero. He snorted to himself, pretending not to notice the lump in his own throat. You're a walking stereotype. It was a personality that he had carefully crafted over the years, and as far as Mark knew, no one had seen past the facade. At this point in his life, there was no one who knew about the broken-down little boy that still lived inside of him, nursing a shiner from his dad's fist and scribbling pictures of rockets among the stars. It was no wonder Mark Kirby had spent most of his life trying to escape the world. When he had been born, his fate was already written, being the only son of drunk Kenneth Kirby, and therefore the one to inherit the Kirby family farm when he grew up. People in town had told him stories about how the Kirby farm had been the biggest, most profitable in the state at one time. But when it fell to his alcoholic father, the entire place had gone to shit. His poor, beautiful, kind, good-hearted mother had done everything she could to maintain what little crops and animals were left, while his dad spent days drinking himself stupid night after night. But she was only one woman. His mother was a saint, and when he considered the good parts of his childhood, it was always her sweetly smiling face and the touch of her cool fingers on his cheek. He never wanted to be a farmer. In fact, he had detested the sprawling mass of untilled land that was to be his legacy. And then Mark's dad died when he was 15. And he and his mother had watched with dry eyes as they lowered his jaundiced yellow corpse into the earth. Once the last shovel of dirt was thrown onto his grave, his mom had taken the deed to the farm and sold it to the highest bidder, severing Mark's legacy forever and any tie she had to her bastard of an ex-husband. They had both wept with joy on the car ride out of town, glove box stuffed with cash and a world of new opportunities open to them. He only had 4 years after that with his mother. And although she died from debilitating cancer, she had gone in peace, telling Mark she would be watching him from heaven and that she couldn't wait to see what he became. He joined the army the next day, and it was his first step towards the sky. Along with the moon dominating his vision, Mark could see the idiot head of Comrade Alexei in the front and indulged in a quick fantasy of slapping him upside the know-it-all skull. He couldn't help it. The distrust of the Ruskies was ingrained in his blood.
I hope you're proud, Ma. Even if I have to work with the Russians, I'd do it for everybody back home.
He refocused on the moon, and begrudgingly, he had to admit it was spectacular in its own way. Barren, like he had thought before, but almost completely unexplored. Mark was still lost in thought when his comms crackled to life for the first time in what seemed like hours. It was Dr. Maxwell, and Mark leaned forward in his seat wanting to hear everything that Alexei heard.
Initial orbit is now complete. Beginning landing sequence. Commander, do you copy? Copy,
Alexei confirmed. Alexei allows the autopilot to do its work, and for a lovely time everything seems to be going as planned. There is casual chatter throughout the crew, pitched low as to not mess with anything Alexei might be doing. But Mark knows it's all hollow words to fill the time while they all fight not to piss themselves. Even he was nervous. Nervous enough that it eclipsed the ravening excitement he felt about stepping onto the moon, and then piloting the mining rover. Peace, though, will always be broken. For the crew, it came as an ear-piercing screech of feedback over their helmet comms, more grating than anything he had ever heard, quickly replaced by the eerie whistling they had heard on the tapes. For the first time in his life, Mark Kirby's blood ran ice cold. Then, everything seemed to happen at once. Alexei was trying to break through the whistle tones to contact mission control, but there was no answer. The lights of the shuttle then burned impossibly bright, blowing more than a few bulbs in nearly weightless explosions of glass before the entire cabin went dark. Mark strained hard at his restraints, hands fumbling blindly at the buckles, planning to throw Alexei's ass away from the controls and land the shuttle manually. He had one belt undone when Alexei announces in a voice muffled by the helmet, since the comms were gone, exactly what he had been thinking.
I'm bringing us down manually. Hold on.
If Mark had been in his right mind, he still would have fought the Russian for the controls. But while he jerked uselessly at his restraints, he noticed Tatiana, her body bowed in her seat as if she was being electrocuted, and panicked sobs just barely audible through her helmet. Everyone was losing their cool in one way or another. A Rosetta Stone's worth of curses in different languages filling the cabin. But Tatiana's panic isn't controlled like theirs. It's blind, animalistic panic, and it catches something in Mark's chest. She was just a kid.
Hey!
He yelled over the furious din, having loosened himself enough to grab her stiffened hand.
It's alright, kid. Tatiana, stay with me, okay? We're going to need you down there.
She turns her head enough to meet his eyes through the glass, fogged up from her open-mouthed breathing, and she lets enough tension out of her body to grab his wrist with the other hand, angling herself towards him like she was made of metal, and he was a lodestone.
Don't fucking leave me,
she gasps, before crying jaggedly in a string of Russian.
I'm not leaving you,
he promises, fully donning the identity of the stalwart American hero they all believed him to be. He raised his voice, declaring,
I'm not leaving any of you.
He didn't know if any of the other crew members gave a flying fuck about his declaration, but it didn't matter, because it grounded Tatiana. He held onto her hand while Alexei, his jaw clenched hard enough to shatter his teeth, maneuvered the out-of-control craft to the lunar surface.
C'est foutu,
Francois said, kicking the side of the downed shuttle as if it would do anything to help the present situation.
English, please, monsieur,
Kirby demanded, arms crossed and eyes narrowed. The CNES member whipped around to the American, feeling like every tendon in his neck was just so taut that they were about to snap.
It means it's fucked. You understand that? Fucked. Just like we are. Enough of that.
Alexei commanded sharply. Out of the ship, the helmet comms had switched to battery power, and they were blessedly able to talk to one another clearly again. At that moment, though, Francois would have preferred to rip the entire helmet off. Death would be a fair price to not have to listen to this raving band of lunatics a moment longer. That's not quite fair, he thought, as the girls are nice and competent enough. He paced along the length of the shuttle, trying desperately to keep his mind occupied before he fell into a pile of grief, fists pounding in the lunar dust while he thought about his wife and child.
Abandon them. You abandoned them. You abandoned them!
The rest of the crew was cycling through all the expected reactions. Hysteria when Alexei confirmed that they were stranded. Soul-rending sorrow as they were forced to confront the idea of dying up here. And outrage that, to Francois's bitter delight, was focused completely on Alexei. He, on the other hand, was reliving over and over when he crawled out of bed to answer the door that fateful night. The tired cries of his child that were, in hindsight, as beautiful to him as the toll of bells. And his wife's hair spread across her white pillow, hand curled near her face, bathed in moonlight. Moonlight. Ironic. Far below in the crater, he could just make out the anomaly they had come for, and he turned away quickly. Seeing it, hearing it made him feel ill. Instead, he looked back to the crew, only to see them converging on Alexei. The Russian commander held his hands up in front of him, willing them to stop, but they all kept coming, demanding answers. Francois jogged over, reluctant to let violence break out when they were going to need each other, even if it meant saving Alexei from the pummeling he deserved. He had almost reached the group when Alexei's shins hit the face of a rock and he was stopped in his tracks. Cornered, panicked, the Russian yelled,
Fine. All of you selfish, shameful disgraces so worried about your own lives. Do you want to know the real truth?
They hesitated, and Kirby, the apparent ringleader, gave Alexei one sharp nod.
We aren't here for a body recovery mission with a side of research into the anomaly, which we now know is called the Deliverer. We're here because the world, the entire world, depends on us, depends on me and that thing.
He points down the crater to where the Deliverer rests.
It's so much more than you can imagine. It's a gateway. A gateway to where?
Kirby asks.
Home. Earth, for one. But more importantly, to a new world.
The group gasps collectively, head jerking to the Deliverer. Alexei talks for what seems like hours. Francois ends up lowering himself to the ground eventually, both exhausted and too shocked to bear his own weight anymore. The Russian describes how the Deliverer had saved one member of the first crew, Dr. Maxwell, by teleporting him home. It means they might be able to return home too, but there was something even more pressing than that. Tatiana took over from there. Her voice querulous at first, but building in confidence as she spoke.
It's some sort of cataclysmic event. Of what nature we aren't sure. But we believe a race that we've dubbed the Creators left these Deliverers in places where they believed some form of intelligent life could find them. They would be teleported to the Creator's planet and therefore learn how to survive this cataclysm. We need the Deliverer back on Earth, so we can uncover the rest of its secrets and answer the Creator's invitation. That's how...
Alexei cut her off at the last minute, even now needing to get the last word in himself.
That's how we save the world. We do this for all mankind, do you understand?
Francois wasn't sure what Alexei had expected. Maybe some sort of hero worship for this scrap of hope? But instead it's like a bomb went off. Everyone is yelling, besides poor Tatiana, who was cowering into Georgina's side. The crew demanded answers to question after question, but most pressing of all, why was this kept from them? He considers joining the fray but hesitates. Alexei was the only one with the entire truth, so he was the only one who could even possibly get them home. And if the entire crew tore each other limb from limb, they would just be another pound of flesh and bone paid to this deliverer. He had been a good man, hadn't he? Why would he end up here, in this wasteland so far from home, if he had been a good man? Francois loved astronomy, loved the mysteries it presented and all the puzzles there within, but he slowly came to the realization that he didn't care for anything as much as he cared for his family. He would willingly perish up here, if it kept them safe. Time was of the essence, and he needed to help get the crew under control if they had any chance of reaching the deliverer. But he indulged himself with a few seconds of silence. Francois reminisced meeting his wife for the first time, stumbling into the cafe at 6 a.m. after pulling an all-nighter, researching a new form of exoplanet, and seeing her beautiful face. She saved him then, and she continued to save him in so many different ways, with her love, with her grace, and with her steadfast belief in him as a man. His breathtaking wife, she had given him a son, so recently that he could still feel the weight of the baby's head in his open palm as he gazed upon his child. Even for a man like Francois, who knew more about the heavens than most common men, he still experienced the universe condensing down into that very second in time when he first held his son. His son and wife were everything. Heaven and earth, and all the stars in between. They gave him strength for what he had to do next.
Enough! So what if this prick deceived us? It's too late now to change it, and we heard the truth from Tatiana's mouth anyway. Did you not hear them? Did you not understand?
He stood tall then, demanding their attention, and they gave it to him.
We can die here, my friends. Sad skeletons in these suits that accomplish nothing. Maybe the world will end in this cataclysm. Maybe it won't. But either way, it would not matter to our dead bodies, no? Even if there is a kernel, a single atom of truth in what Alexei and Tatiana have told us, we have to chase it down. Whether for the entirety of Earth or for the few that you love, don't we owe it to them to try?
Everyone was silent, watching him as he caught his breath after his impassioned speech, and for a horrible second he thought it had fallen on deaf ears, and he had failed his family. But then...
Well, what are you guys waiting on? Let's detach this damn rover and get the job done.
The rover moves over the surface of the moon at a crawl, treads churning the dirt and dust as the crew descended into the crater. After the Frenchman's impressive speech, everyone had finally fallen into their assigned roles, working like the colony ants Alexei had always viewed them as. He labored alongside them, hearing their voices in his comms and the threads of hope and fear that saturated their every word. But fear as they did, they still did what they had to do, swallowing the enormity of what Alexei had revealed and continuing to move forward. Maybe it was love, like he knew it was for Francois. Or maybe it was glory, like he was sure drove Kirby. But regardless, the crew persisted. And for Alexei, that was all he could ask for. For the first time, he felt camaraderie with them all. They were dependent on each other, teetering on the verge of death, and that truth was like a wire binding them all together. He even coughed a laugh at something Georgina Metz grumbled, and an unwelcome idea bloomed in his mind. What if these people weren't just worker ants, perfectly suited bodies to complete a job? Alexei had spent so much of his time in his office, poring over the translation and footage, listening to the chants, until they became part of his stream of consciousness, that he hadn't realized this motley crew might be worth more than he had presumed. Could he have been wrong about them? Should he have told them the entire truth up front so they knew what they faced? He had been so sure they would panic and flee that he had been determined to keep the secret, but watching them swallow the impossibility of the truth here on the moon and still press forward made him doubt. It would have been so much easier to have had their expertise in full from the very beginning, not just when he was able to access it with a lie. And if he was wrong about the crew, could he be wrong about the Deliverer too? The thought sent a chill racing down all of his nerves like ice water. He always knew there was an off chance he was racing to his doom when he sought the Deliverer. But it had been worth it just for the chance to know. The idea that he could die, ignorant of the brilliant truth he sought, had been a constant. Alexei sat in the passenger seat of the rover, Georgina at the wheel, and Kirby mounted up next to the drill. Kirby had taken the lead, as was to be expected for the big-mouthed American, but at least it gave Alexei time to ponder. One would think the chances of everything being right, the cataclysm, the Deliverer being a gateway, and the Creators saving them, were astronomically low. But still, Alexei knew in his very bones he was right. When he closed his eyes, the chanting played in his head like a mantra, over and over. He wouldn't have been drawn all this way for nothing, like some inevitable force of nature had been driving him forward all these thousands of miles, if he was wrong.
Hurry! 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 Hurry!
Something begged.
We are waiting.
Alexei clenched his fists and locked his gaze onto the cavern, dark and bewitching, and the Deliverer within. I'm coming, he thought.